I got so many, because the parable of the talents is what I want to talk about too. Because I just was reading this chapter when you were walking in. So yeah, man, welcome to another Brooks McDonald podcast here with my good friend Tyler Milkey. I'm Brooks McDonald. Bink. And yeah, we just if you've watched us, sometimes I would call it the ramblings of a madman, but it is just a really chance for us to sit and unpack our thoughts together, and maybe you'll find some context in it. Maybe these are some discussions that you're wrestling with in your head that we just want to talk about. Really, Christian brother to brother, business owners, fathers, both of us, leaders in the community at times on different secular boards together from our neighborhood association, Tyler. And,
it's always a fun one.
Always delving into those things. But how do we just discuss being a Christian in our everyday world outside the doors of the church, and really pouring into also what does it mean to walk in faith, but also in business and in life and finances. And so I've been reading this book. Let me remember the title again: Poverty, Riches, and Wealth. And again, disclaimer, I'm not the best researcher on like who wrote it, what their context is. Honestly, I like to read all things. If you looked at my library, you would see lots of non-Christian books, lots of Christian books, lots of documentaries. Yeah. I believe in taking a lot of information in, and that the Lord can help guide you through it and give you perspectives. And I've heard really good perspectives from people that maybe don't walk necessarily in the exact faith walk that I do, but have some wisdom of life or life experience. And I value all of that feedback. So poverty, riches, and wealth. And so one of the topics that I think would be cool to talk about is in that book, there's a lot to go on there, and it could just get really deep. But one piece that Tyler, me and you had talked about is like, he talks about how in the old world, or if for us in America, and we're not very old, but if we're in Europe and you travel, you see these really ornate cathedrals and churches and all those just visually massive presentations. And one point he was trying to make was that of the day when a lot of those cathedrals were being built, that the followers, the members of the congregation, actually couldn't read. They had no ability to understand and reading and understand and comprehend anything. So the cathedral itself was the storybook. And so instead of just words and trying to comprehend a word, they were visually presenting the omnipotence, the omnipresence of the Lord that we serve. Mm-hmm. And he was making a point not only to that piece, to give a little grace, because as you and I have kind of talked, there's times where I look at those and I'm like, what was this? Whose money did you use to build this? Because if I'm in your congregation as a tither, I'm going to have a little issue with why the steeple's 100 feet high or not, and just trying to go with that. But he also talks about how in Scripture Moses was instructed to build Mount Sinai, and I believe I'm looking off of my phone, but I'm not in the book. But he was really referencing that with Moses, because they were out wandering around, they didn't really have master temple builders of their people. The Scripture, it talks about how the Spirit came upon an individual in order to help to guide him to go build the temple. And so it was like, you got to think this, if you've ever read through I run in nerdy circles at times, and my buddy Jeremy would appreciate me saying that, but he spent time in the game Roblox. You know, Roblox? No, it was in Minecraft.
Oh,
He was in Minecraft.
Roblox is like the low bit version.
But Minecraft is a bit version too.
Yes.
And when it first came out, him and a buddy in college built to the specifications the tabernacle. But he had it for like 15 years, and we were in a class he was teaching, and he took us into the tabernacle, and we were able to visually see it. As he had built it with the lamps, with all of that.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen renderings of it, it was a pretty, I would almost challenge in some ways, outlandishly built thing today. Yeah. I mean, if I built this here in Destin, Florida, there would be a lot of people who'd be like, what? Whose money are you spending?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
The Lord told me to, friend. So in the book, he was really kind of pointing out that this was of God to build such a beautiful thing, and that the Spirit was laid on these people. And so if you don't know us well enough, I'm coming at this from probably a hard angle of criticism in the church of how typically over time when I've watched financials being handled, I've been on multiple financial committees at churches, and really it's more about, as I would challenge, the stewardship is the Lord's given us this financial blessing. Mm-hmm. How do we steward it in the best way possible? And typically I've been very critical of any building renos unless more of it's going to missions and outreach.
Yeah.
As I read this book and there's discussions, it's more around, hey, the Lord is the God of abundance. He's bringing you things. And if we go over to the other podcast we did where I know I referenced again that Erwin McManus piece and our ability to create, there is a challenge for us to do the best we can with whatever we've been given. And so Tyler, and your music ability and knowing sound, you're trying to give the best you can.
Yeah, I think we joked the other day, but like my perfect thing is to make the kick drum sound as great as it can possibly sound, which to some is ridiculous, but you think about these like master stone workers, back in the day of building these cathedrals, they were doing some insanely excellent, mind-boggling, detailed work unto the Lord, which to some might sound like excess, right? But it was really of excellence unto the Lord.
They're first and best.
Yes,
they're
exactly.
First and best.
And there's context to everything, right? It's hard when you're building something that's huge and grand and excellent, and you're taking all this money in, and then the community around you is like impoverished and can't eat, and there's context to it all, right?
There's context
and how we
to
spend
it all.
Money and how we. I think we talked about this the other day, but it was the idea of there's some liberty to these things, right? There's not something in the Bible that says build grand monuments to me, but there's also not something in the Bible that says don't build grand monuments to me.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, the stone worker that does excellent work and that's all he does, he's not about feeding the poor in that perspective. He's about doing the work that is most excellent in what he can do.
Yeah.
We talk about that today of these churches that do, and our church does this, a big production, and it's the same type of thing, right? Doing these huge productions unto the Lord, and doing these excellent worship times unto the Lord that to some may seem like extravagant and over the top, but really it's to bring to the people such an awe and an excellence of God and his worship and his presence, and building these atmospheres that help people, draw people in to see the awe and wonder and beauty of God. And it was no different with these cathedrals and these big places where you walk in and you're like, wow, this is incredible.
Me even to a few months ago being at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. If you don't know what the Ark Encounter is, a pastor up in Cincinnati, Ken Ham.
Sounds right.
Ken Ham.
I've watched a lot of his.
Of course, he's got a lot of very passionate debates
and,
with Bill Nye and things like that. But he felt the vision to build this, full-size ark, first of all, and then the whole encounter around it. Mm-hmm. A lot of money that's gone into that and donated. And I'm sure there's some people that are pretty critical of walking in and visual effects. Even the Babylon Bee had headlines 2 days ago or so saying that there was a full immersion water slides for baptism out the ark. Even
I love the Babylon Bee.
Those
guys are hilarious.
Even satire, there's criticism, I'm sure, of how that is. But when I was in there, I was thinking, thank the Lord, somebody decided to give that much effort to go toe to toe with the Disneys of the world, which we love Disney World, but to go toe to toe in a Christian environment, so you can learn and you can see God's creation, but in a setting that rivals what you would see in Disney World. And how appreciative I was that that's unfortunately in a weird way how our children grow up. We talk about the frustrations of how they'll be distracted by social media or devices, but our desire a lot of times as humans is to see things in really cool new ways, and the iPhone's a really cool new way to have presentation of things. And if we don't as Christians stand toe to toe some of those presentations visually, video or whatever, we're not going to have the attention of the people.
Yeah.
I would challenge it.
My old pastor used to say, like, I guess the gospel doesn't change, but the way we present the gospel must change.
Man, that's so interesting you said that. I actually knew somebody recently that said that they converted to a much more legalistic environment because of those things, that the gospel doesn't change, and so how we present the gospel doesn't change, and we're arguing even in the other side. But
Yeah.
I'm with you. Obviously, we both go to the same congregation and where that is. So it was neat to unpack kind of the conversation around visually ornate things that obviously were used by money given to the church. We've also talked about, some really tough discussions around, you see ministers that have some really ornate lives that they live, and how and where that is.
Prosperity.
Well, and it may not be pitfalls, though. It could be that some of these individuals that are super talented have written a book, and they've received, I'm just making up numbers here, but they received $50 million for the books that they've done.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't know possibly that they donated $25 million of it to charity, that they tithe 50% of what they were given.
And
but
they don't
even
take a
in that
salary from their
example,
church.
even in that example, they had $25 million left over, more than enough in that way to live very extreme, ornate lives and do some very big things. I love the word you said earlier, which is context. And I think that's a big piece. Context is so important. And I would challenge anyone, if you're struggling like I have in the past, or maybe even Tyler has, around the concerns of that, first of all, I would challenge you, have you walked a mile in their shoes? Or are you falling victim to gossip that you've heard from someone else? So if you haven't done enough research to clarify information that you've heard, I would start there. We don't know, though. You don't know exactly the hearts of individuals, but I used to worry also as much as if I was tithing, as where the money was being spent in an exact way, or almost wanting to control how that money was being spent. Mm-hmm. And part of the tithing process is trusting someone else in that tithe.
It really is.
And turning it over to say, look, my obedience ended when I wrote the check. Meaning that wasn't my responsibility to have anxiety, to turmoil, to sweat over how that every dollar was being accounted for. As a business owner with a lot of staff and a lot of people, I have this natural tendency to, no one could tell me no on that end. So maybe I had that desire to see it. And you see that in a lot of times, people wanting to steward that money all the way through. And maybe they have an ability and a desire to want to steward it. But I would challenge people's hearts that if that's where you're at, explore the gospel, explore conversation around, is that where you need to be at? Do you need to, or maybe is there some peace in releasing that and saying, hey, the Bible discusses if people that are ordained by God and gifted, and that ability to do so, and trusting them to do that because that was their ordainment, and not only their ordainment, but them to be held accountable to that ordainment. Yeah. It's not our responsibility to hold them accountable to it. They're doing what God's gifted them, and in that gift, much is expected out of that gift. So that was one topic. What else was there in our discussion pieces?
We talked about us as people being goal centered.
Yeah,
and how that is a good thing. Yep. But maybe there's some, again, context to, maybe things aren't always like, we look at stocks, we look at the what we always want to move up and to the right, up and to the right, up and to the right. And maybe there are times in our life where things aren't always up and to the right. Maybe God has a different mindset for us, or shifting us into a different transition period, and it looks like we're failing, but we're right where God wants us.
Right.
And again, we've talked about this, are you saying that you're in a transition period and you don't know, so you're just doing nothing and nothing's happening and you're making no effort in the things that God has stewarded with? God's given everybody something, right? Like, are you stewarding your time and your area as well as you possibly can, waiting on God? Or are you just making up excuses, right?
Yep.
For these periods. But go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, there was a couple pieces. There's one that in our discussions we talk about, if we had eternal mindsets, if we could for a minute view time the way God views time, I think we would view our mission a little differently. Yeah. And some of that means that we always want to be the main character in God's journey, but we've discussed that, would you be okay with it if it's your great-grandchild that changed the world for his belonging, and it took that time of you pouring into your child and them pouring into their children that really brought that child to make these amazing changes? But they wouldn't have done it if you hadn't contextually lived it exactly the way you are. But in your lifetime, you didn't really experience anything massive or grandiose. And I think our society today, unfortunately, puts us in a position to where we feel like we have to do these exciting, great things at all times. I think it's part of the whole idea of not being patient or having to be entertained at all times and pacified at all times. And that has to be more new things quicker. In a game, you don't have to work it all the way from the beginning. You want to be able to go back to the level that you just left off on. And so having the mindset around being more patient with that. But also, I mean, there's a lot of books that I read talking about healthy things grow. And I think there is some truth to that, is if there's a healthy thing going on, a natural byproduct of health is growth. I think a lot of people, again, in society, though, want to see growth as a non-failing growth. But honestly, the only way growth happens is by failings. Fail, first attempt in learning. And so it would be the idea that you have to fall down a whole bunch and get back up. That's where the wisdom comes from, which I think could feed through to a discussion that you were talking about, is maybe God doesn't think that you are prepared to take on what you're praying for.
Yeah, I think did you give me the analogy of the you talk about a healthy thing grows, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe there's growth happening that you can't necessarily see. We think of a plant.
Yeah.
The roots have to go deeper before the
in order to be able to support
it. Yeah, can actually get larger.
Yeah, that's exact. I don't think I said that analogy, but that's a really good one. But even it just could be that God has every intention of answering the prayer you've asked, but in order for it to be done, that He views it to be ready for, and I view that as my son is 11. He would love to drive a car. If I gave him keys today and released him on the road to drive, I feel bad for everyone on the road, and then health safety wise of it. He's not ready.
Did you watch Michael Todd's?
No.
He literally did that this week. He said, basically your blessing at the wrong time can be a curse.
Yeah.
And he said that exact thing. He's like, if I hand my 6-year-old keys to a new car,
man,
he's
got a wise word.
That is a curse, but handing it at the right time when they're ready for it is a massive blessing.
Yeah, there you go. Being prepared and ready for that to happen. And so maybe it could be that He has every intention of answering the prayer we're asking, but He has some of these trials and tribulations, for the blessing is through trials and tribulations, and the wisdom and experience that comes out of that, being in battle. And battle is a broad word, but in life and the challenges that we have, we may not be able to prepare to lead those people to withstand the heat of that challenge that God may put us in until we're ready, until we're seasoned in battle to be ready to take that on. So
I think about that with a lot of look at Joseph. Maybe we talked about this in the last one, but he was given that promise of, or given the dream that everyone would bow before him.
Then thrown in prison for an obscene amount of time.
And look, and he held to his morals through the whole thing.
Right. Because he ran out completely naked from a woman that was trying to take advantage of him.
She tried to take advantage of him, and then
blamed him for trying to take advantage of her.
Exactly.
Got booted in prison, and then told these two men a prophecy for them. And the guy got out and got the job he wanted and forgot about him in the process until like 2 years later. It's like, well, actually, you know what? There is a guy that's in prison right now that may could help you.
Could you imagine being him though? Like we read these stories and we forget the context that there's years and years, and not decades.
You're right.
Happening in between the feelings that I'm sure he felt like at times, God, are you there? Did you forget about me? What about this? You told me this and I don't see how it's coming together.
Yeah.
Like what is going on? I mean, that's a human thing that we all experience at times.
The parable of the talents, and the parable of the talents in its, simple discussion would be, first of all, I was reading in this book and I've always been like broad in my head. I didn't just study talents word clearly enough. Not saying that I really have now, but this one book claims that a talent is the equivalent of $30,000 in today's dollars.
Okay. So it was quite a bit.
And so he gave 5 talents, which would be, in that example, $150,000 to one. Mm-hmm. He gave...
it was 1, 5, and 10.
Was it? Or was it 1, 3, and 5?
That was 1, 5, and 10.
Either way,
maybe you're right, though.
Tripling number, basically. Yeah. In that example, he wrote it where it was.
Maybe that was the end.
It was 150,000. It was 90,000, I believe. And then 1 talent, 30,000.
You might be right. Maybe I'm
It
thinking of the
doesn't
10.
it
because
doesn't
it's
matter in
5
the example
doubling.
because of how it
Yeah.
is, but it was a lot of
That is
money.
a lot of money.
And so the one took 150,000 and doubled it, and made 300,000, made double the money. The other one took 60,000, 90,000, doubled it, made
Yeah.
another 90, 60,000. Then one buried it. And he came to him, and not only did he say, the first part of the question was that it was given to your capacity. Because I always was curious, why did the Lord reference 3 different levels? And it was based on capacity.
Yeah.
And referring back to the discussion we were just having, we may not be at a capacity to be able to handle what God would give. If there's an example to say, if you watch, there's documentaries on people that win the lottery and follow them about 5 years later, and most of the time they've lost all their wealth. It's not there anymore.
Mhm.
There's even a challenge to say, if you took all the world's wealth and equally distributed it amongst every individual person within 5 years, the wealthy individuals would be wealthy again, the middle class would be middle class, and the impoverished would be impoverished.
There was a study done around that, or
There was a theory. There's a theory. There's no way to study it specifically, but there's a theory around
Okay.
that. I'm
I
sorry.
didn't know if they did that
apologize.
with like
I probably
a-
said study, but I would mean theory.
Okay.
And whether that's
But
true or not,
it wouldn't surprise me.
it wouldn't
whatsoever.
surprise me. And it was around the lottery discussion that it was. And again, where you are politically and how that is, that's not really what I mean in that sense. Just to say that I do believe it's true that when I was little, the things I wanted to spend my money on as I was preparing is different from now at 37 years old and what I want to spend my money on. And because I'd prepared myself for experience it, even saying generational wealth, that it gets to where it's like 70% of wealth transferring from the second to the third generation loses.
Yeah.
And then it's like 95% from the third generation to the fourth.
Yeah.
And really the mindset is the people that are experiencing that money brought in didn't have to have the sweat equity to build it. They don't know what was sacrificed to make it. Their appreciation and respect towards the wealth isn't there anymore. So this conversation was basically challenging that capability in the parable of the talents was around that exact thing. That maybe you want to have the 150. Why am I the guy that was given the 30, but you aren't ready for it yet? So there was just a discussion even around that piece, not of how the money was used. But then it goes on to say, not only was he upset, was a mild term towards the one that buried the money.
Yeah.
Because he said, I know you're a shrewd boss that reaps where he did not reap, or sows where he did not sow, and spreads where he did not spread. One of those three is two of those three is the correct verbiage. But to say,
called him wicked, I think.
yeah, he calls you wicked servant. Basically said, not only am I mad at you, but I want them to take away everything you have, because too much has been given that it returns, abundance will follow. But to who does little, your talents will be taken away, your abilities will be taken away. And so, that's
wasn't there another section, or another, maybe it was in Proverbs, but it basically compared like slothfulness to witchcraft. Like it was.
Now that's a different one I haven't heard. Now we're about to really throw a zinger in there.
Can't seem to find it. Discussion for another day. There was something. Let me see if I can find it here. Something I saw recently that I thought was good. Man, I don't think I saved it. But it was in Proverbs, and it was about working for what's around you, and stewarding what's around you well, and being discerning what is kind of like these wishful dream that are just fruitless, like winning the lottery, or I'm going to become the next NBA basketball player, and you're 5'2" kind of thing. Like also taking account in your life, like am I pursuing something that's just ridiculous? Like this is just this is birthed out of my own ridiculous desire to be like this big thing, and I'm completely failing in my marriage because I'm out late at night trying to do these things that are just fruitless.
Yeah, no, I think so I've had to do a lot of introspect. I've talked on here about imposter syndrome and the deal that you've been given the ability and you can do great things, but if you allow imposter syndrome to consume you, you won't do any of it because you'll convince yourself you're not good enough to do that thing. And with that same mindset, I believe that anybody can do just about anything that they set their mind out to. If you can believe it, you can achieve it, is that old mindset. Now, if you're 5'2" and you're trying to go up against 7-foot basketball players, maybe there's something to recognize, but Muggsy Bogues could have challenged that reality as well in the time and energy he was putting in. I do think when people say, well, what am I good at? Well, pay attention to what's around you. People will compliment you on what you're good at, and believe me, they're not sugarcoating it. As Southerners, we're pretty polite, but if you get direct compliments that are unsolicited, usually that means you're doing pretty good at something, and maybe that's something you need to be good to maybe look into.
Mm-hmm.
Things I've been told I'm good at doing. I've been told I'm good at singing. I've been told I'm good at channeling thought or discussions around things, or coming with diplomatic ways of communicating things. I've been told that
meeting everybody in the room,
mediating conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to spend more time pushing towards that. Maybe that's why I'm sitting here today doing these things. But you first have to realize that you're worthy and have the ability to do that. But I like what you were saying, and this is a weird thing that came to me today, so I'm going to talk about it because I feel it relates, and that there's no coincidence here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I was thinking about how we are so busy chasing so many things. And I had a business coach say one time, your day is like the bullet to a gun. And most people, unfortunately, ignite the bullet without having it in a chamber. And if you ignite a bullet, if I hit a hammer to the back of a shotgun shell, the beads in it actually go nowhere. There's nothing to channel the energy. It disperses everywhere without any impact or use. But when you put the bullet into the chamber and you ignite it and you channel it and you focus it, then it's useful. Not so useful from a bullet's perspective, but you get where I'm headed. It goes somewhere. It accomplishes what it's set out to do.
That's good.
And I think that's us in our day with so many distractions. We have to start stripping ourselves of unnecessary distractions in order to accomplish what you want to do. Warren Buffett said in a comment, and I told you, did we talk about this on the first one? Maybe we did.
I think so.
It was basically saying write down everything you want to accomplish and strip it to 5 things that you're really good at. Okay? Now take those 5 things and select 3 that you really, really need to be good at. Now don't ever focus on the other 2 that you just took off. Not only get rid of the 100 you did, but be so laser focused, you don't even focus on the 2 of the 5. You strip it to 3. And that's where I think people that have created and accomplished great things are laser focused. There's not a surprise that a lot of people you'd meet, if you tested them that are very successful, they're somewhere on the autism spectrum. They have such an ability to focus in and get something done that it could almost be on the spectrum, as we would say, to do anything, because they can just focus in. And I don't know if necessarily that relates on what you were saying, but I thought of, we did about 12 to 13 weeks in an RV over a year period. And when we were on there, there's a generator on board, and that generator is very important to your life out in the RV. But the problem with a generator is it only has so much load capacity. And if you have the air conditioner on and the fridge is running and you have something in a plug, if my wife put that hair dryer on and clicked it on, it will blow the generator. It can't handle that load. It can only has so much capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to blame the Lord all the time for him not giving us enough capacity, but are we managing the capacity we have correctly? Yeah. And now some things are out of our control at times. A single mom working 2 jobs. She's doing the best she can to get through the jobs and parent the crazy kids. Yeah. How in the world? You can't get rid of being a parent. You can't get rid of having to provide for them. But still, I would challenge in today's society, there isn't any training for us just to say stop on some things or just to say no on some things. We have a habit of wanting to say yes to everything. We have a habit of wanting every minute we have to be consumed by social media scrolling. I'm guilty of Instagram scroll mindlessly.
Yeah.
We've got to be serious enough about unplugging some of the things that are draining us of random things that are not necessary, or not, whether it be not God glorifying, not good for your health, however you want to relate that in that conversation, to finding peace and quiet.
So I'm reading this book again, and one of the titles is your God-given limits. And it's basically talking about embracing, like, God gave you limits for a reason, embrace them. And there's a impactful story, and it's this old kind of parable or something, but this man's on a bridge Another guy comes walking up and he says, "Hey, can you hold this end of the rope for me?" And the guy's like, "Well, I've got somewhere to be, but okay, I'll hold it for you." He goes, "Thanks." The guy grabs the rope and jumps off the bridge. And then he's holding on for dear life, like for this guy's life. And the guy hanging off the bridge keeps yelling up to him, like, "My life's in your hands. Don't let go." And he keeps going back and forth. And he's saying, "Can you help? Can you do something?" And all he keeps saying is, "My life's in your hands. Don't let go." And finally, the man that's holding the rope has a point where he thinks, "Okay, I need to do something. I can't give up my entire life. I was on the road to go do something, just to sit here and hold this man that is basically weighing me down." And finally, he said, I'm going to brace myself, and you're going to pull yourself up, or I'm going to let go." And the guy's frantic. "You can't let go." Da, 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 da. And finally, he lets go. And it's a really impactful story of, we have limits in life, and there are some things that we have to let go. And I love your analogy of the pick 5 things and narrow it down to 3, because if we pick the 5 things we're good at, we all have responsibilities that we still have to steward.
Yeah.
Even if we're talking about work and
Right.
going out and doing things, you might have a family, you might have kids. There's probably something you have to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
And going from 5 things to 3 things probably gives you the space to also take care of the other things that you need to steward, like your spouse and your kids and all this other stuff. Because I see these things on Instagram, and sometimes they really make me sad, because they're motivational, and there's good there. But when they're like, "You got to get on your grind, you got to work 18 hours a day, you got to this," and sometimes I'll send those to my wife, and I'm like, "Yeah, but then 20 years down the road, you look back and your kids hate you, and your wife hates you, and you're probably divorced, because you were so focused in on making money and doing these things that you actually forgot about some of the important things around you in life, and having that balance."
Yeah.
And
No, that's
embracing, like, "Hey, I can't work all the time. Sometimes I have to say no to certain things so that I can be home with my wife."
No, I think there's a real danger to our society in the discussion constantly around building great things. Now, there's some people that have devoted their time to build amazing things, and they had to put in a ton of time to do it. And if we didn't have it, our world would be so far behind without doing that. I don't want to not give credit to that.
And there's even talks in the Bible about, if you owe somebody a debt, work tirelessly until you pay that debt off.
Yeah.
Do it without ceasing. I mean,
But
I think there's times of seasons of
there's
that.
same images on Instagram that say, what do people wish for on their deathbed? And it's not that I wish I'd spent more time at work. It was that I've been around my kids to see that. If you've not been around me, apologize if you haven't listened to me. This is the 50th time you've probably heard me say this, but I get my daughter and my son, who are 11 and 9, one time at 11 and 9. That's only it. That's it. One time.
Yeah.
Then they're going to move to the next stage. And so I get my daughter's 9-year-old eyes to see the world and dad one way for one time. Because when she's 25, I may have way much more wealth. I may have more time, but I have a 25-year-old daughter that sees the world. Maybe that's not bad to travel the world or see that, but if I can impact her and the sponge that she is at 9, I'm committed to the idea that she'll see me and adapt to those ideas better at 9 years old than at 25.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to spend every minute I can doing that. Now, you have to have the ability. You have to have the capacity. You have to, people will look at me and say, "Well, Brooks, how did you get so much time to be able to do this?" I took a lot of risk. And that risk yielded reward that could have yielded loss, but I chose to take the risk. And that risk yielded me time in exchange for risk.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I exchanged time for risk, and it's paid off, and the Lord's watched over me for that. But no, I think that's a great discussion around what do we do, and it just kind of goes to simple things to say we want to blame God for so much. If we go to God and ask Him, that's why even in the Lord's Prayer, it's a discussion around thanking Him, first of all, putting yourself in a mind of gratitude for what you have.
Yeah.
Because we could ask Him for anything at any one time. I was just telling a friend of mine, I don't think I talked about it on here. Tony Robbins made an analogy to say there's a traffic jam in LA and there's a Ferrari sitting in the left lane, and he is just so daggum annoyed. He's stuck in traffic and he's trying to get somewhere. He's got a talk he has to do. He's got all this work and all these employees he's got to deal with. Why would he have to be stuck in this traffic? But there's a guy in a Corolla sitting next to him, just wishing he could be sitting in a Ferrari stuck in traffic. How cool would it be to be in a Ferrari when I'm stuck? I wouldn't care about what's going on if I just had this. If I just had this one other thing. The Ferrari's hoping for the helicopter. The guy in the Corolla's out hoping for the Ferrari. But then there's a guy broke down on the side of the road, just wishing he had a dependable car. Man, those Toyota Corollas, they're dependable. They run forever. Go 400,000 miles. Why am I not in that car? Instead, I'm stuck, broke down on the side of the road. Then it says there's a guy on a bicycle going on the sidewalk, just wishing he had a car that could break down. He never had that opportunity. He's on a bicycle, 2 wheels. He can't pick up any girls on a bicycle. This guy in the car could pick him up.
Yeah.
Then there's the story of a guy looking out a window of a hospital room, sitting in the bed, and he sees a guy on a bike, and he just wishes he had the ability to ride a bike. That's all he wanted to do. There's always something we wished we could have had more of. And that's the long explanation to come back around to the point of gratitude in the Lord's Prayer. And so I just wish we would spend more time saying, man, instead of saying, Lord, you should have fixed that, do we just sit and sometimes think, okay, wait a second, I woke up. There's enough trees around me to produce enough oxygen that I can breathe to step outside. We're in this Goldilocks vicinity of the sun that if it went one way this bit or one way the other, we would either fry or freeze to death.
Yeah.
But God has chosen it to be in perfect order. It rained. We're not dying of drought. There's food on shelves in the grocery stores. Just presenting ourselves in a way that's just thankful for what we have. And if we could just start there. Now, how we get to deeper conversations around, I think sometimes monks have it together. They focus so much on one focus. They have no distractions. They have truly cut themselves off in life to except do one thing that they're good at in service to the Lord. Versus how we are today and how we have every distraction under the sun pulling us different ways.
But again, it comes back to context.
It has to come back to context.
Because there's a part of me that hears the monks. It sounds amazing, but it sounds so selfish at the same time.
Yeah.
Like they've so devoted their lives to focusing on God and shutting out everything else that they've actually shut out the beauty of people.
Yeah.
And interacting with those people and sharing. Like I feel like it's this. There's somewhat of a selfish pursuit, just as much as and I'm guilty of it too. Pursuing all the things of the world and forgetting to shut down and actually just pursue God and take the time to be quiet and take the time to, really just be alone and pursue God.
That's, also, these contexts of what's selfish and what's not.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think first of all, it takes a lot to make the world go around. It takes all kinds. It takes a bricklayer, it takes a ditch digger. It takes a CEO. It's just all in how are we presenting ourselves. I would challenge us in these discussions. Inward discussion. A lot of evaluation that God offers is self-evaluation. Yes, we may see others, but the tendency of us as humans is to judge those people around us as to what they're doing if it's right. That's not for us to decide. Our discussion is between us and the Lord.
I just saw that this morning of, it's Matthew 7:1, and I think it's Matthew 7:1. Everyone wants to quote it. And it's don't judge others lest you be judged yourself or whatever. But everyone likes to forget the next couple verses, which is, pull the log out of your own eye before you pull the speck out of your brother's eye. And basically the whole thing was don't judge, be self-reflective. It's not a verse to use to say, don't judge me or whatever. It's a verse to say you need to look at yourself in every single situation.
The journey you need to go on before you even present someone with their issues is a long journey. And I would challenge most people would never need to set out to correct anybody if they're not willing to set out on that journey.